you're like me, you go out to your mailbox, you get all sorts of things from people asking for money. Some people you've never even heard of. Just the last couple days, I've got the American Civil Liberties Union, the Amnesty International, ASPCA, and NARAL, Pro-Choice America. So that was just 2 days worth of mail, people asking for money. The need for all these groups, and our group, is pretty great. And no one is just independently wealthy and funding these things. For the most part, it relies on the donations of people who care about the various issues that are being addressed by these groups. And so I thought, as I go into my talk today, which is about how that need gets warped and twisted, that I still want to end with something positive and uplifting. So the first part is gimme, 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 the gospel of greed. It's how people take these natural and good needs of groups that are doing good work and twist them to their own selfish gain. And then I'm going to depart from that and look at the proper approach and how this volunteerism, both of money and time, is essential. And after I went through the whole junk mail thing coming in, people asking for money, I come into my office this morning, and sitting on my desk is one from the Unitarian Universalist History and Heritage Society, also asking for money. So the need is almost universal. Any group that's trying to do anything outside of government funding is going to be needing your money. And this month, of course, marks the beginning of our pledge month. We've already had 2 people say, please turn your pledge forms in on time so Chuck can do the budget. That's important, so I'll reiterate it too, and then I won't say anything else about that other than the pledge cards are there. Please turn them in. We're not going to talk about how much money you should give other than what you've already heard, and we're not going to keep beating this drum. My philosophy has always been to say, we're here. You've supported us year after year. The money has come in. We've kept the lights on. We've kept the doors open, and we've produced ministry week after week. And it's because it matters to you and it's important to you. So that part is pretty self-evident by the fact that we've been here well over 50 years now. A bit of an anomaly in a very conservative part of the state. And we do have a very important need to fill here. So that's about all I'm going to say on that. What I wanted to talk about was how this need for money to do ministry can be really warped and twisted. One of the examples that's been going on in the news lately, you may have heard about, is a pastor named Creflo Dollar, and that is dollar like the money. And there's a snarky article written by Olivia Nuzzi, writing for the Daily Beast, and it's snarky but deservedly so when you hear what's going on, at least in my opinion. So I'll read a little bit of it. God wants Pastor Creflo Dollar to have a $65 million private jet, according to paid spokesman for God, Pastor Creflo Dollar. On Friday, Dollar's website unveiled Project G650, an airplane project that he claims has something to do with understanding grace and empowering change. You may be wondering, what could this mysterious holy airplane project be? Probably something related to charity, you must think, like airdropping food into famine-ravaged countries, or flying sick children to doctors, or lifting 2 of every animal out of a flood. Not quite. Dollar was once the proud owner of a pretty baller private jet, but now it's old, and naturally he wants a new one. He also wants his followers to pay $65 million for it, just as Jesus intended. On his website, Dollar made his case. The ministry's current airplane was built in 1984, purchased in 1999, and has since logged 4 million miles. Recently, on an overseas trip to a global conference, one of the engines failed. By the grace of God, the expert pilot, who's flown with Creflo for almost 20 years, landed the plane safely without injury or harm to any passengers. Dollar claims the private jet allows him to safely and swiftly share the good news of the gospel worldwide, in a way that commercial aircraft no doubt just couldn't. The mission of Project G650 is to acquire a Gulfstream G650 airplane so that Pastor Creflo and Taffy, his wife, and World Changers Church International can continue to blanket the globe with the gospel of grace, Dollar's website said. That's a quote. We are believing for 200,000 people to give contributions of $300 or more to turn this dream into a reality and to allow us to retire the aircraft that served us well for many years. The uproar from this posting to the website was so great and so widespread, thanks to modern media outlets and the infamous Facebook, that it was removed from the website almost immediately. Now here's another example pre-Facebook days. Those of you who are my age or older may remember this. You youngsters may not. And this one's even more amazing. In 1987, television preacher Oral Roberts made a dramatic appeal. I see the heads going. How many of you don't know the Oral Roberts story? I just want to say, oh, you okay. If his supporters did not send in donations totaling $8 million within 3 months, he warned that God would call me home. That means die. Yes, he literally said, God has told me that if I don't get $8 million in 3 months, it's time for me to die. Now, there were those who complained that Roberts was extorting his viewers. No. And using the deity as an accomplice. But there was no doubting his charisma or his results. Roberts received over $9 million, and God did not call him home. Now, this brings two questions to mind, at least two questions. Why didn't Oral Roberts want to go to heaven? It's sort of the whole point, isn't it? And secondly, why were people willing to donate based on such a ludicrous fundraising appeal? Now, there are a lot of scammers out there proclaiming something called the prosperity gospel. And this is the notion that God wants you to be wealthy. He wants all of you to be wealthy. But you must give first before you will get. And there's a verse in the Bible, because there's a verse in the Bible for almost any scam. This one is Malachi 3:10. If you're going to run a religious scam, you have to have a Bible verse for it. You know, you can't just, as crazy it is, you got to have a verse. You got a verse for handling poisonous snakes, and people do it. So this verse is, give money to me and God will make you rich. Bring to the storehouse a full tenth of what you earn, so there will be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord all-powerful. I will open the windows of heaven for you and pour out all the blessings you need. So that's it. That's the verse that says, you give your 10%, give to me so I can buy my airplane, and God will make you wealthy. Because Malachi 3:10 says so. And you can actually go to God and claim the promise. It's almost like, here it is, you said it, God, now you have to do it because it's in the Bible. Here's the verse, I'm claiming this promise. That's the phraseology that's used. Now never mind that Jesus, you know, the guy that the Christians follow, said that the love of money was the root of all sorts of evil. And it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, Jesus' words are usually very uncomfortable for his proclaimed followers, especially those of the gospel of prosperity. Now, it would be far too easy to continue pointing out rampant hypocrisy, and this hypocrisy certainly reaches beyond Christianity. As always happens as I'm working on a sermon, something falls in my lap. And I read a story about a Buddhist leader, I think from the Theravadan tradition, which teaches that handling money is wrong. So all the lay people, the commoners, can handle money, but the monks and the teachers aren't supposed to touch cash. So this guy was very popular, and he's in the West, and so his followers take him out to dinner. Well, since he's so high and mighty and moral and can't touch money, he enjoys his nice meal and then sits back and waits for someone to pay for it because he can't handle money. And he does this all the time. And not only that, his followers handled the money to buy him a really nice car and take him skydiving and all these other things. So, you know, it transcends religions. Whatever there's a religion that's claiming if you give money to God, you'll get rewarded, or Conversely, well, I'm so holy I can't touch cash, so could you help me out, please? Scams ensue and abuses ensue. But the reason these things happen is because religious institutions across cultures and across religions do need funding. Sometimes they're funded by the government. That's certainly happened in the past, but nowadays that's pretty rare. So in order to do your ministry, you do need cash, and you need cash from your followers to do it. So there is a legitimate need. And this legitimate need results in things like sacrifices, donations, tithes and offerings, many different names, but ultimately the same in essence. The practitioners have to give of themselves to keep the religion going. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing new about that. There's nothing new under the sun. Unitarian Universalism is in a pinch lately. Last June, the UUA president had to give a report to the Board of Trustees Executive Committee, and it was not a pleasant report, because the budget had projected $2.4 million in unrestricted major gifts. So that's free will donations, if you will, money that can be used as needed by the association. $2.4 million. However, they only got $900,000. So they had a shortfall of $1.5 million. This was rather earth-shattering in the UUA world. Reverend Tom Schad wrote in his blog, The Lively Tradition, another approach to the problems being faced with these budget shortfalls. And you can disagree if you'd like, but listen to what he's saying and see if it makes sense. The cause of Unitarian Universalism, as we now understand it, is not sufficiently compelling to generate the resources to continue itself. That's a pretty bold statement. Unitarian Universalism is not compelling in and of itself enough to get the funds it needs. There are not enough people sufficiently motivated to give the time and money needed to sustain our liberal religious institutions as we now think of them. Stuck in survival mode, we cannot gather the capacity to grow. The evidence is the declining pledge levels in many congregations. And I, by the way, am very happy to say that has not been a problem we've had here. We have not had declining pledges. We have had growing pledges year after year. But apparently, across the association, it's a problem, a big problem. Our cause is too small and too safe to ignite sufficient passionate engagement, the kind of commitment we need. On the other hand, our cause is too big, all things to all people. And on the other hand, it's too small. This particular little organization in your town, this building, this minister, these people in all their particular ways. To put in terms of our survival, the only thing that can make the difference is the passionate engagement of more people. So there's another side of this whole calculation, which we have talked about. The need to grow if we're to survive, to be able to pay a minister, to pay for the needs, and thus you need a new big building, but we can't afford a big building, and the cycle goes round and round as we wrestle with our survival here. So he's not saying anything new other than he doesn't find Unitarian Universalism as it is right now sufficient to increase the numbers necessary to grow. I'm not privy to the problems that we face on a national level, but I have little doubt that our numbers nationwide and worldwide are woefully few. There are approximately 200,000 Unitarian Universalists. So if you want to feel small and insignificant, there are 50,000 Southern Baptist churches and mission organizations. That's one Southern Baptist major organization per 4 Unitarian Universalists. Does that blow your mind? It sounds a little bit gloomy. I share these things because I want to emphasize a couple of points. First of all, as we go through these budget gyrations, as we go through wrestling with how we survive year to year, it is always important to operate in a fiscally open and responsible way. Our needs must be clearly spelled out, as we do with our annual budget. Our budget must be available to all, and it is. And accountability is expected of the Board of Trustees and of me. Secondly, we are part of a greater whole, and we should not settle into contentment just because our congregation seems to be doing well. We are not wrestling with declining pledges. But although we have something great to offer, we have to remember that we're part of something bigger. And there are a great many people out there in the world and in this area where we live that could find a home here if only they would come and visit. And because we are part of something larger, we need to not just focus on only what we're doing here, but also how we contribute to the greater whole. This is why we make a point of paying our dues each year to the UUA, and why we pay the recommended amount each year, even when we sometimes struggle with our budget a little bit. We don't give less because we do want that greater whole to survive also. Now, I tend to be idealistic when it comes to how our church operates. So I've shared this story with you before, and if you've heard it, apologies, but I think it's important. I had a professor in seminary who, in one of my classes, said it was absolutely essential for the minister to know the pledge amount of every congregant. And I said, what? Would you care to explain that? And so we did talk a little bit after class, and I wasn't entirely sure where he was coming from. I'm going to try to interpret. What he said was, in order to effectively minister to people, you need to know how much they're giving. And I think what he's trying to say is those who really care about the church, you want to know who's really giving, and those who just show up and maybe put $1 in the plate, and you need to focus your attention on those who give a lot because they're the ones who care the most. I'm trying to spin this in the best way possible. It sounded very bad to me when I heard it. But it ignores a very, 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 very important point, that we all come from different socioeconomic levels. Everyone isn't getting the same income. You cannot compare everyone on that level playing field that way. Jesus pointed this out. I don't quote the Bible a lot, but sometimes Jesus really nails it. Absolutely hits it right on the head. And he says this to his disciples in Mark chapter 12. Jesus sat down opposite the place where offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, and I'll put in parentheses here, they made a big show of it. They would count it out. Everyone knew they were giving a lot of money. But a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more in the treasury than all of the others. They all gave out of their wealth. She, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." Jesus wasn't impressed by rich people putting lots of money in the donation plate, because really they were giving out of their wealth, and for them it wasn't a huge sacrifice. But then someone comes by to whom each of these pennies is extremely valuable. When she put that money in, she was really giving till it hurt. And Jesus wanted to point that out. Jesus wasn't focusing his ministry on the people who were giving him lots of money. So this whole idea that a minister needs to know the pledge amounts, to me, is just contrary to how I would want to operate. And I have never seen anyone's pledge form ever in all the time I've been here, and I hope I never do. Chuck sees them, Chuck deals with them. I don't want to know. I hope I can treat you all equally, regardless of how much money you give. We need your donations, don't get me wrong, but I'm not giving preference to those who give more, with all regards to my seminary professor. This may not be a good business model on how to operate as a minister, but it is a good ethical model. I can't imagine for one instant Jesus checking the pledge cards of anybody, and I would say that for any other great religious leader who actually tried to operate on ethical principles. What you decide to give is none of my business. I thank you for what you do give. And another point to remember as we talk about giving is giving of our time. If you give of your time, even by just coming here regularly, by serving on the board or other committees, if you give of yourself to help us function, this is equally vital. We don't have pledge forms for your time. We don't ask you how many hours you're going to donate in a year. But we need your presence as well as your financial support. Those of you who come up here and stand behind the pulpit and speak on a Sunday, you're giving up your time and efforts to prepare the talk. You're also helping us because we pay speakers approximately, give or take, $200, maybe a little less, and that's money that we're not spending out of our budget when you take the time to come up here and take a turn. We appreciate that, not only sharing your insights and your ideas, but just sharing some of that financial burden. We could not afford to hire speakers to come in here every Sunday that I don't speak. So never underestimate the importance of your coming up here and taking a turn. And we deeply appreciate that also. Because religions are made up of fallible people, the stories of greed and corruption are easy to find. There are way too many examples of Oral Roberts and Creflo Dollar bilking money out of people, good people, who think they're giving to God. And it disgusts me beyond measure. But there are far more stories of good people working together and operating on shoestring budgets and keeping small congregations going and meeting the needs of each other, as I think we do here. Those stories don't get in the newspapers. They're not fun to read about and make fun of, and it's not filled with hypocrites that are easy targets. But they're the people that really matter. They're the congregations that matter. They're the groups that matter. And I thank you for being one of those groups that, if our story were in the newspaper, it would be a story that would fill us with pride and be a good example. I really believe that. This congregation has struggled many times throughout its history, and yet we survive. And we will survive no matter what happens. Whatever pledges we get, we've certainly lost people both to death and to moving. And every time you think you start to get ahead, you start to fall behind again. We understand that. That's the essence of what it is to be here. We will not turn the lights off. We will not shut the doors. We will come up with a way to keep things going. So I don't want to ever have you go in a way feeling like I'm Oral Roberts up here saying, well, God told me if we don't get 40,000 in pledges, I'm going to die and the church is going to close. That's ridiculous. So we don't need those kind of nonsense threats. We're going to make it happen one way or the other, but we need your help to do that. But we will make it work. We will be here. The doors will be open because we, in my humble opinion, really matter in this area. We matter to the people who come here and those visitors who come and have told me, wow, I wish I had known there was a place like this years ago. That's why we do this work.